All right, this is Riders of the Dawn.
Welcome back. This is Stu.
This is Jay.
We're on episode 4, I believe. And I think the next natural thing to talk about is plot.
And as we were sitting here discussing plot, we were really talking about the way you're taught plot in schools and how not useful that is.
Yeah, so most people are going to remember probably from some point in their scholastic career, at least if you grew up in the United States and probably Canada, that the plot structure that you were told about was like this thing where there was an exposition, then there was the rising action, and then a climax, and then a falling action,
or the resolution.
Yeah, and then a resolution, and that's the end. Right. But that's not useful.
Yeah, that's not a tool that you can use as a writer. If you're thinking about it from a reader's perspective, I mean, maybe you can fit things in there, but this is a writing podcast, not a reading podcast. So, as we discussed in I think the first 2 podcasts, exposition doesn't necessarily happen at the beginning. In modern literature, what we're seeing a lot of is this type of interspersed exposition where the characters are revealing the world and the story to you through the story rather than just through telling you how things are and then beginning the story.
Yeah, there's not it's kind of old-fashioned to spend a lot of time at the beginning having characters walk around telling you about the setup for the story. What tends to happen now is you jump right into action. You start right out of the gate with things happening, and the exposition is sort of spread out through a number of plot events to sort of give you an idea of what's going on while things are already happening.
And this is actually an important marketing point, because if you're not grabbing readers on page 1, they won't care about what cool stuff you have planned on page 200.
Yeah, and I should also point out that this has been a technique long before the rise of Amazon and those kind of samples, because in a bookstore somebody would pick up a book, and usually what they do is they turn to the first page and they see what's on it. And if you have something that compels them to read on the first page, then you have a really good chance of making a sell.
Mm-hmm. And that's really important. So this idea of having 20 or 30 pages at the beginning of the book of exposition is it's not going to grab your modern reader.
Yeah, and even before the modern reader, it didn't really even happen that way very much. Unless you're looking at, I don't know, something like if you're in the fantasy genre, you're looking at Tolkien. Tolkien has a significant amount of exposition at the beginning of the story. Even Moorcock's books, his older books, have a significant amount of exposition at the beginning of the story relative to the length of the story. So the first chapter is just giving you basically the setting. But sort of since like the late 70s and early 80s, there's been a big trend of, rather than doing that, you just begin with the action. Or sometimes you can drop someone right in the middle of the action and you can backfill all the boring stuff later.
Right, which you see a lot of, because you want the backstory. It's also why we see so many damn prequels these days. But I think it's a good idea to, when you're starting, instead of thinking of exposition, you need to have some actual plot events happening that are going to move the story forward. So what is a plot event?
Yeah, well, to me, a plot event is anything that happens in the story that... Now, first of all, what is plot? To me, plot are the events of a story. So let me get that out of the way. For some reason, occasionally people want to argue the use of the word plot. Plot, to me, is the events of a story, apart from, say, characterization. So if you spend time drawing characters in a scene, that's not really plot, but it is part of the story. So plot are the plot events. What I would consider any kind of plot point or plot event, and different people have different definitions of this, I guess. But what I consider a plot event is any event which either raises the uncertainty of the desired outcome of the story or lowers the uncertainty, that resolves it to a certain degree, or trades one for the other, anything like that. So if you have a plot goal that's like slaying the dragon, you have a plot point where like the hero's sword breaks before he gets to the dragon, and now it's much more uncertain whether he's going to have the tools necessary to defeat the dragon. That would be a plot point. Or he becomes injured by a snake bite, and that is going to drastically increase the uncertainty of the desired outcome in the story, which is for him to slay the dragon.
Another example might be doing things that help reveal clarity of the plot.
Oh yeah, reveal.
So you might have a hero and an enemy, a protagonist and an antagonist, and you know that they're fighting against each other, but you don't really understand why. And a plot event might reveal more history between those two characters that would more clearly explain their rivalry between one another.
Yeah, I call that a reveal. And reveals are used almost tropically now, where you have, as a plot point, a revelation of something that alters your perception of the plot itself.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do it well, then it's like, it's like the end of Sixth Sense.
Mm-hmm.
And if you do it poorly, I don't know, it's like...
it's like watching Sixth Sense 10 years later.
Yeah. Where you're like, of course I knew that. Or you reveal something that just doesn't make any sense. It's like, I was the alien all along.
Yeah, it's almost like a Deus Ex Machina instead of a cool plot twist.
I was the killer all along.
Yeah.
You told us you weren't the killer.
That's called a twist. It's not a twist, that's a lie.
We watch Bob's Burgers.
So let's see. Those are ways to kind of expose your plot, do some exposition while still showing action, while moving the plot forward. Because the thing about plot is it has a direction that it wants to go. It wants to go towards this resolution. So, Stu and I are both musicians, so when I first began to think about plot, it was always in a musical sense, because in music it's the same thing. You have a certain amount of dissonance, and that dissonance moves closer and closer towards the cadence, right? And so your climactic point in music is often the loudest and the most dissonant, resolving to the most consonant, which is really what you're doing in your plot. You're moving from a place of unknown conflict to more known conflict to
uncertainty
about realities or outcomes, and finally you're reaching a point of
what happens
of ending, right, where you see the result of all this plot motion forward, and you can start to relax away from that, and that's one way that I view plot structure. Now, another way that I view plot structure is a little more gross, but I think it's a really good metaphor. It's that as you're writing, it gets more and more difficult to get the words onto the page because you're juggling so many different plot threads as you're getting characters as you're getting towards this climax. So it's almost like you've got this gigantic zit, and excuse me if this grosses you out, but deal with it. There's the closer you get to the climax, the more you have to squeeze this zit until at the very end towards the climax you have to really squeeze it hard, and then it pops and
the pus squirts all over the mirror. And you're like, where am I? I can't see myself through the pus.
God.
Was that a zit or a cyst?
Oh man.
Should I call the doctor?
My plot is everywhere. But once that happens, it gets a lot easier because you've popped the zit, and you have a literal release, which is what happens after the
aching
climax.
pain goes away, and you have aching pain that's replaced by sharp pain that's replaced with the relief of pressure.
Relief of pressure, right.
So I think that's actually a really good metaphor, even if it might be gross. The other thing, a plot has goals. And in order for you to create an effective plot, you have to have some end goal. That's something that we've been talking about today. How do you establish that end goal? Well, there's a bunch of ways to establish an end goal. But essentially, you want to set something up that the main character wants. It's probably the easiest way to do it. Or something that you as a reader want, even if the main character doesn't want it. And it could be anything. It could be like, the guy and the girl get together at the end of the story.
Good triumphs over evil.
Yeah, good triumphs over evil. I figure out who my parents are. Anything, right? It's any kind of goal that person is trying to have. And all your plot points are going to be relative towards that plot goal, towards the resolution that you set up. If you don't set up a resolution, you can end up having what I call like a wandering plot, which is just you have somebody wandering around doing random things without any particular goals. And what eventually happens is that the reader gets disconnected because he doesn't know why he's reading. Yeah. He doesn't know what he wants, so he closes the book.
And so this is really a pitfall of the unstructured writer, of the person who doesn't outline much.
Yeah, gardener writers can fall into this.
Now, and I certainly do, but if we're talking about process, I might write that way because I, as the author, don't know what happens, and then suddenly I'll stumble upon something that I want to happen, and then just retcon 50% of what I wrote.
Yeah.
And now, as an author or an aspiring author, make sure that you do this. Be very liberal with your editing pen, because if you do that, don't make your readers suffer through you not being sure what happens next.
Yeah, that's a really, editing should be its own category or its own discussion as well. But yeah, if you have that goal, now you can actually be totally a gardener and manage the micro level of the plot so well that the reader won't care that you didn't establish like a firm end goal at the beginning of the book. But that requires a lot of really, really good writing at the micro level. So maybe the next thing we'll talk about, rather than just big plot points that significantly alter your perception, there's also little plot points where something happens, some event happens very quickly along the page, maybe one or every other page or every page. There's something that happens, there's something new that's added, a relationship changes, some new piece of information is gathered, some conclusions reached, some event happens, a fight happens, whatever it's going to be. If you can manage the micro really sufficiently, you can keep a reader even without like a really clear end goal. But I think if you have that end goal in mind, it puts all the other micro plot points into perspective, and you can stop and think about a part. It's like, should I have this part in my book? Mm-hmm. Because does this serve character, setting, or plot? Does it serve those goals, or is it just me trying to create something interesting for 2 pages?
Right, and your goal is to really have it serve all three as often as possible. A really good way, I think the best way that I think about plot is like a detective novel. Little plot points would be, he finds a clue. The detective finds a clue to keep him moving down the path. Whereas a big plot point is like he's chasing the villain, and like a bank vault explodes, and he drastically has to change course from where he was in order to reevaluate his end goal. And these are things that again, they're pushing the story forward while keeping the reader on their toes, because you always want that satisfaction of finding the next thing that's going to move you forward.
Yeah, the next thing that's going to contribute to whatever you're doing there. Incidentally, I should also mention that plots do not have to resolve to their expected conclusion.
Yeah.
In fact, some of the best books are ones that have an unexpected conclusion, or a really unexpected way of reaching the desired outcome. of a plot. That it happens in a way that you don't expect. You could think, I don't know, a really good classic example that most people will be aware of is the end of Lord of the Rings. So the end of Lord of the Rings, Frodo, and I'm spoilers. Frodo can't throw the ring into the pit of doom because he covets it too much. And so in that was the whole goal of the plot, was throw this ring in the fire, bro. So Gollum pops out of nowhere and bites his finger off, and then he falls into the fire and destroys the ring. So you have an unexpected way of reaching the desired outcome. Which, when that event happens on that precipice, it actually really, like when Gollum pops out and starts fighting Frodo or whatever, or Sam, really I think in the book Sam approaches him and he sees that Frodo's fighting Gollum. But Frodo's invisible.
Right.
I don't know, that may not have happened that way, it's been a while. And we have a huge amount of uncertainty over this plot outcome that honestly the reader may have taken for a foregone conclusion for a large part of that final book. And then when we finally get the desired result in a really unexpected way, it's very satisfying. It's very satisfying.
Yeah, and you can see this as, if you expected this as the resolution, which Tolkien sets it up, so you know that that's the goal all along, and you get to this resolution and he can't perform the resolution as you're expecting. It's upping the tension, which is exactly what you want. You want to up that tension to its ultimate point. So that's why you need the antagonist Gollum to come in, and really the antagonist is who solves the problem, which is really kind of cool. An author who I think does something really similar in a different way is Stephen King. He will, in a lot of his stories, do the ending the way it should be done, not the way you want it to be done.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I want to spoil the Dark Tower, but let's just say that the Dark Tower does this in a way that he even tells you. You're
not going to like this. Stop reading here. You're not going to like this resolution.
Yeah, just imagine it the way you want it to happen, and not the way that it actually happens. Go ahead and just put the book down. Of course, as the reader, though, you can't do it. You have to see what actually happens. And
it's not really what was desired by most readers.
But for me, it was what should have happened, and so for in that instance, the reader is you have the resolution. It's not the resolution you wanted, though. So you're not left with this kind of euphoria of, building pressure, sharp pain, relief. It's like building pressure, sharp pain, and like vomiting. So, like fetal position vomiting.
Yeah, and then that's the satisfying ending.
So it has its own kind of satisfaction, just not what you wanted. So as we're talking about develop, if we go back to the childhood explanation, we have the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Rising action, you need to think as building tension, and without getting into pacing, really, there needs to be enough rising action with enough frequency to again keep the reader interested.
Yeah, you got to add. Well, so if a protagonist has a plot goal, protagonist has a goal, they need to be moving towards that goal. They need to be taking steps towards that goal. If they're never moving towards the goal, the book is going to be closed.
Right.
So they got to be moving towards the goal. As they're moving towards the goal, that increases, it increases the certainty of the desired outcome, which is good because that makes the reader want to see if that actually happens. And then along the way, you dial back that certainty by having bad things happen or having the person make mistakes as an event, or all the little things that are setbacks. But you don't want to ever stall the progress in a significant way that's going to make the reader get fatigued and close his book.
Yeah.
And then when you get to what you really want to be the climax, like right before you're going to really let the reader know what happens with this plot goal, right before that event happens, you need to crank up the uncertainty. Like the uncertainty needs to be at its peak. Just as like you've built up the certainty of it, and then you're really going to pull back and make sure that the reader's really uncertain as to whether that's going to happen. Then when you finally give them either the yay or nay, there's a fail state or there's a success, that's when you finally get the so-called falling action or the resolution. But in reality, like you see it on that graph, and the resolution's like big, and in a real book, it's usually like the climax happens, and then
the last 10 pages of the book.
The last 10 pages are resolution, and that's it. That's all. That's what you get, because the reader's doesn't always feel super compelled or interested to read after he knows what happens.
Yeah, and you know, the rising action is also the place where you're going to see the most character development. Now, a big caution I would give to new writers is don't develop characters on the page just for the sake of developing them. Their character development needs to point towards your plot goals.
Yeah, it has to somehow influence their ability to achieve the goal of the plot.
Yeah, because if your character is a detective, and in your rising action, one of the things you reveal is that he's also an amateur guitar player, and that doesn't in any way serve the purpose of the climax or the resolution, then it's a promise that you made to the reader that you're not going to fulfill.
Yeah, and it's just superfluous.
This is kind of like a reverse Chekhov's gun. So what Chekhov's gun is it's the gun that you see in the first act on the mantle of the fireplace that murders someone in the second act, or somehow resolves the plot in the climax. It's what you introduce in the beginning, in the quote exposition, that helps you resolve the story in the climax. So if you're making promises, or if you're making character developments that are not relevant, then your reader is going to get to the end and feel a little unsatisfied, because it's almost like you put a thread into your story tapestry that just
didn't have any place.
It didn't get to the end.
Yeah, and I would temper that by, like, you want characters to appear three-dimensional and real, but you don't need to. It's all about the amount of time you invest in that. If you mention in passing that, like, he plays guitar, that's not. I mean, that just lets you know that a little bit more about who he is. But if you spend a whole scene of him, like, practicing and thinking about guitar, and then nothing happens with that, then people are gonna be like, why did we read this?
Yeah.
Or they'll get bored and they'll be like, I don't want to see about this guitar practice and stuff. Get back to the magic.
Right.
Get back to the murder, whatever's going on. But if your character is going to use that guitar to woo a woman later on, then you do need to talk about it.
Yeah. Because if suddenly he just pulls out a guitar and he just
is good at it.
Then your character is going to be.
Then you're like, he plays guitar.
Yeah. Then you've created a Mary Sue, which you want to avoid as well. So
yeah.
This is why, plot, setting, characters are all interrelated, and it's important to make sure you're thinking about them. And for us, I like to think about them in the order that we've kind of presented them here. You might be different, but it is important to understand that they're very related.
Yeah, and I think there's always the difficult part is technically executing all these things well. So executing the plot well technically, and when I'm talking about that is like actually writing it. That can be a difficult thing, because pacing it requires a knowledge of how fast things are being read, how fast, how many hundreds of words am I going to have like a real event happen, Pacing is one of those hard things to kind of nail down unless you've done it, unless you've had a lot of practice. And just putting the words together to make things convincing requires practice.
Mm-hmm.
So the technical part of it, it's really hard to just give advice where it's like, well, how do I make a convincing climax? It's like, you're going to have to try. You're going to have to try a couple times to figure out how you can do it, because I can't without looking at some words you've written give you any kind of instruction on the micro level of how you describe things, or what your sentences look like, or do you have too many sentences between events? Do you have too many sentences describing action? Do you not have enough sentences describing action? Is action too close together and the reader's confused? Right? Like, those are all technical things that are really hard to just give good advice on, or give rules of thumb on.
Well, in writing plot and characters and settings, it's really you are yourself a magician showing to your reader the perfect platonic realm of this imagined world that you have created. And you're not going to be great at it the first time, because it's very difficult to communicate what you're imagining. And in this case, you're imagining an entire universe in many cases, if we're talking about fantasy. So if you don't spend the time and make the mistakes, this is a process not just for writing, but for anything. You gotta make some mistakes. You gotta be very liberal with that editing pen. You might take a couple swings at a specific scene, and the more you do it, the better you're gonna get at it. You're gonna decide what words you like. Words are gonna have more specific meaning to you, because they're gonna paint with different colors.
Yeah, and I don't know. Yeah, that's like when we get down to the micro level, that's sort of learning your way around the palette, rather than learning the proper. Like, what we're talking about is what does a curved line look like?
Right.
Versus what angle of your pencil do you use to shade that perfect curve, right? All that stuff on the micro level requires a little bit different approach in general. So I think that's it for us today. I think we're out of time.
Yeah, I think that's going to do it. Guys, thanks for listening. This is Jay.
This is Stu. You can find me at davidbstewart.com and dvspress.com.
And you can find me at matthewjwellman.com.
We appreciate you listening.
And we'll see you again later this week.
All right, have a good one.